Welcome back to UC Davis Live. I'm Satirius Johnson. Just over a month ago, a ruptured pipeline started pouring oil into the ocean off Huntington Beach in Southern California. Among the agencies responding to the spill was the Oiled Wildlife Care Network, a program of the Karen C. Drayer Wildlife Health Center at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. The OWCN was established back in 1994 in partnership with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife as a reaction to the devastating Exxon Valdez oil spill and the American trader spill in Huntington Beach. Today, it brings together 44 organizations and 1,600 trained personnel to rescue birds and animals caught up in oil spill disasters. Joining us today to talk about the OWCN's work are two people who responded to last month's spill. Mike Ziccardi is director of the OWCN and executive director of the UC Davis One Health Institute. For the past 25 years, he's acted as an oil spill response veterinarian and coordinator during more than 75 spills nationally and internationally. And Jamie Sherman is a veterinarian for the OWCN. During spills, she oversees the veterinary care of oil-affected wildlife from stabilization all the way through release. Sherman also spent 10 years working for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, caring for orphaned and injured wildlife, performing collaborative research, and assisting with large-scale population field studies of bighorn sheep, mule deer, and elk. Welcome to you both.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So before we get started, I just wanted to remind listeners and viewers that this is a free webcast. You can watch it live and watch it after the live broadcast on the UC Davis Facebook and YouTube channels. We're aware of others posting links saying that you have to pay to watch this video. Please do not click on those links. This is a free webcast, and we are taking your questions. If you're watching us live, just leave them in the comments section, and we will work in as many as we can. So, Mike, let's start with kind of like a general overview. What happens in an oil spill? How does it affect wildlife in the short and long term?
Sure. Oil can affect wildlife in a number of different ways. The main things we're concerned about initially during spills is some of the acute or short-term effects. And really in our area, what we're talking about are seabirds. So birds in the aquatic environment use their feathers almost like a dry suit. What that does is it keeps cold water out. And it traps a layer of air next to their skin. It allows them to stay warm. So birds that have a body temperature of 104 to 106 degrees, you can only imagine the need for that in the marine environment. What happens with oil is it actually creates a temporary hole in that dry suit, allows cold air to seep next to the skin, and they can get low body temperatures very, very quickly. In order to survive, they need to come ashore or to get warm in some way. If they come ashore, they're not eating, they're not getting fluids from their food items, so they get dehydrated and they start to burn body stores very quickly. So in a matter of hours to days, they can actually die from starvation and dehydration if they're not cared for, collected, and brought into purpose-built facilities like ours.
So when a spill occurs, what are the priorities for the OWCN when it comes to trying to rescue these animals?
Yeah, our first priority is making sure that we are doing a cooperative response, bringing in those people with the skills and the knowledge to be able to care for those animals right from the start. So we work very closely, as you mentioned earlier, with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're in essence the wildlife response arm for our state agency. What we're doing is we're calling as many people as are necessary within that 1,600 pre-trained people to get them out onto the beaches as quickly as possible, starting to recover animals, starting to provide them initial first aid, and then get them back into rehabilitation. What we found is if we can get out there quickly, capture them using skilled and trained individuals with specific techniques and get them into care, really that short amount of time is actually increasing survivability of the animals that are affected during these spills.
Right. And Jamie, I guess you're one of those 16,000 people or 1,600 people. How do you go about responding and treating animals?
So as a veterinarian, we're responsible for looking out for the medical care of these animals. And so as Mike mentioned, those first few hours, first few days are the most critical. And so as a veterinarian, the first thing I want to do, I want to get that animal stabilized. So those main problems that were mentioned were, dehydration, a low body temperature, and being very, very skinny or emaciated because they haven't been eating. So the first thing that we really try to do is what we call stabilization. So we provide that supportive care for them that they've been lacking. And so that's really kind of my first goal as I'm thinking about the care for these animals. Once they're truly stabilized, then we move on to their, other issues, which is the fact that they have oil on their bodies. And from that point, we really go towards removing that oil in a safe way, making sure they don't see some of those secondary effects like burns to their skin, issues along their gastrointestinal tract where they can get wounds there, or any wounds from them being out of water. Again, Mike mentioned that most of these animals live out in the water. And so when we bring them on land, they can be prone to developing, some issues related to not being in their natural habitat.
Right. And what is, the network success rate for responding to oiled wildlife? I mean, are you able to kind of quantify percentage wise or number wise, how many of these birds and other animals you've been able to rescue?
So historically, as you mentioned, it's very difficult to sometimes evaluate that, and especially because there's so many factors that go into our survivability or the animal survivability, coming from how much product was released, what type of product was released, how quickly they come into care, or is there something else that is also going on in the wild that may be affecting their overall health even before they were oiled. So there have been studies done by the Oiled Wildlife Care Network that have estimated that historically our success rate is anywhere between 50 and 70%. And so, ultimately we strive for the highest possible release rate as we can.
Right. I want to remind people watching live that we are taking your questions. If you'd like to ask a question, we can just leave it in the comment section. We'll work in as many as we can. Is the threat of oil spills getting better or worse? I mean, have industry practices improved?
Yeah, I can take that. Definitely have improved. If you look at the large scale spills globally as well as locally, the number of large scale incidents, tanker spills, things of that nature, have gone down drastically since the late 80s, early 90s. And a lot of that has to do with both federal and state legislation. In California, as you mentioned earlier, with the inception of the Oil Wildlife Care Network coming from the Exxon Valdez spill and American Trader in 1989 and 1990, really the people of California were happy with what was set up federally within the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, but they wanted a second safety net. So they established the Lemper-Keene Sea Strand Oil Spill Act in California, which created that whole new arm of the California Department of Fish and Game at that point, dedicated to best achievable protection of the environment from spills. And from that came the OWCN. So really, California is the world's model for prevention of spills in addition to response.
So when a spill happens, what can members of the public do to help? I know a lot of people feel like they want to, jump in and help. So what can they do? What should they do? What should they not do?
Yeah, we understand. Even during the Orange County incident, the first day of the spill, we literally got 300 calls on our hotline with people that wanted to help. Really, because of the success of the Oiled Wildlife Care Network and the fact that we've been doing this work for 25 years during non-spill time, we do have those 1,600 people that we've trained to be able to respond to animals, both in the field as well as in the facilities. And so really our first responsibility and the best thing for the animals is for us to call on those people that have been pre-trained to be able to do that. Now, if we have a massive response where we literally need hundreds of individuals helping us, that's where we can then integrate members of the public that may not have the training or the experience to do that. But we can bring them into our facilities to have them assist. Really, the best thing people can do during spills is to have gone back in time to get trained up by us and to work with our 44 partner organizations. Really volunteering for wildlife rehabilitation organizations and other groups that are part of the OWCN, by getting the volunteerism for unoiled animals, that's the best way to get trained for helping us during spills. So we encourage everybody to reach out to their local rehab organization, assist them during non-spill time because they desperately need help, especially during baby bird season and things like that. And what we can do is integrate the oil spill training within that. So the next time we have an incident like this, we can bring people in to help.
Right. And so to be clear, the 1,600 volunteers you have, they may or may not have had any kind of veterinary training beforehand. This is any member of the public, whether they're a veterinarian or not, can join this network.
Absolutely. So again, with our 44 organizations, what we do during non-spill time, and really that's 95% of our work, is do trainings. We do drills and exercises. We're working directly with our member organizations so that when a spill occurs, we're not making up the system and developing protocols and procedures on the fly. What we're doing is training to be able to respond quickly. So for example, a local fire department, they're not forming the fire department at the time the flames are going, right? You have people that are there, trained, experienced, have the equipment, have the supplies, so that when the bell goes off, they can respond quickly. That's basically what we're trying to do during non-spill time, and having members of the public that can come in and get that training and really get part of the system. That's the most effective thing for us as oil spill responders, as well as for the animals.
Right. And I know there are a lot of, people who want to help and maybe have seen commercials for certain types of dishwashing liquid that have been used to help birds, but you basically are saying, don't try to rescue any animals unless you've been trained. It's not as simple as just, bathing an animal with dishwashing liquid.
It is not. It's a laborious process, even for animals that are healthy, that just have oil on their outsides. Really, we look at an average of 10 to 14 days of getting an oil bird in that is healthy and released. Also, oil is a toxic substance. And so if people are out there trying to collect animals, in addition to getting bit or pecked or scratched, the oil that might come off on their hands, in their vehicles, if they're transporting it, it really can be a danger to the individual, as well as if they bring the oil, as well as potential infectious diseases back to their families and their pets. And so it's really contacting the professionals there. We have a toll-free number that we activate during every response, having that information come to us so we can send out those people that are trained and have the equipment to protect them, as well as protect the animals, is really in the best interest of everybody involved.
Right. So anyone who wanted to maybe help out this time around but wasn't trained, they should reach out to you now or to the other organizations now to get trained for, unfortunately, a possible future oil spill.
Absolutely. And all of our member organizations are listed on our website, OWCN.org. And the contact information is there. So members of the public can see what the network is, but they can also contact their local organization. We have our map there. We're very proud of our 44 people organizations on that map. And we really do encourage people to reach out and get connected with their local community so that they can help in the future.
Right.
And you don't have to be an animal expert to get involved. As you mentioned, you asked about being a veterinarian. As a veterinarian, I'm actually one of the many people who are involved, and there's lots of tasks that can be done, whether it's working directly with an animal or helping with a facility. And so, anybody who has interest, whether or not they have experience working directly with animals, There's either jobs if you want to get involved with animals, what we can get you guys trained up, or our member orgs can get you guys trained up. But it's definitely not a closed club. We encourage people who are interested in getting involved, and there's tools for us to be able to get people trained so that they are ready to be working with animals directly.
Right. So even if it's like maybe someone's not comfortable going out to retrieve injured animals, there might be something kind of at the, maybe some admin work or things that back at the office or back at the center that is very instrumental, but maybe not necessarily, working on the front lines.
Absolutely. When it comes to wildlife rehab of any kind, I'd say some of the hardest work is the work not done directly with the animals. There are so many amazing volunteers who are involved with cleaning dishes, preparing diets, helping to clean out their enclosures. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes that may not be the most glamorous work, but it's actually some of the most important work.
What are the costs and benefits of rescuing wildlife in this way? Let's start with the costs. I mean, it can't be cheap.
It's not. We actually did a cost benefit analysis from 3 of our largest spills, and this is back a paper that we published about 10 years ago. And even at that time, for large scale incidents, the average cost per animal was about $600 per bird collected during that time. But what needs to be understood is that those costs would have been 10 times more if the system that we have in place wasn't here. If we didn't have purpose-built facilities, if we didn't have people that were trained, if we didn't have a system already in place, you're talking thousands to tens of thousands of dollars per animal. Plus, as far as the costs on wildlife, it is something that some people do emphasize and do have concerns about the cost of collection and rehabilitation of animals. The simple fact is that those are costs that are borne by the spiller. It's a responsibility of theirs. It's part of the cleanup process that occurs. And so even if the funds were not spent on collecting and caring for those animals, it doesn't mean that those funds could be used for conservation of species or the purchase of land, etc. The responsible party simply would not be paying them. And the benefits are tremendous. In addition to actually saving animals that are in our hands, we're collecting data that can be used to get a better estimate for the impacts for the environment as a whole. We're also using it as a research base. We're learning things from each animal that comes in. For example, the 7 snowy plovers that came in during this incident. It's a federally threatened species. And so our ability to know more about threatened or endangered species, because we have some of them in our hands and we can care for them, what that can do is that can actually give us more information that could be used for conservation efforts moving forward. So it really is a benefit as a whole, even if you get beyond the dollars and cents part of it.
Right. And then as far as preserving an ecosystem as well, I mean, if a lot of these animals don't survive, something like that, it could actually have a long-term effect on the ecosystem.
Absolutely. I mean, we're fortunate enough to be collecting more of the macrovertebrates, right? The birds, the mammals, the other species that are more visible. But it needs to be understood that oil spills affect every level of an ecosystem. And for our ability to go out there and to collect these animals and to collect information on them, what that can really do is to give us an insight into the larger impacts. If we're seeing that, how many invertebrates, what is the impacts to seagrass, all the different animals and plants that exist within the ecosystem. It just adds to the overall picture of the potential ecological damage that occurs from these accidents.
If you're watching us live, we are taking your questions. Just put them in the comment section. We'll work in as many as we can. So the OWCN has been active for 30 years now. What sorts of improvements have been made in caring for oiled wildlife in that time?
Jamie, you want to take that one?
So we are making improvements with every spill. We're making improvements even in the off times. So I think one of the things, especially, we brought up early on is on the understanding of how quick intervention can truly affect the survivability of those animals. So for example, in this spill, we have an entire what we call field stabilization area set up. So those animals that are being captured are receiving extra care within anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour of being captured. And that's huge. That's immediately providing hydration to them, getting them nice and warm, trying to get them as dry as possible, and then allowing them to kind of calm down, because when you're dealing with these species, it's a very stressful situation. They're both physiologically stressed, meaning that their bodies are stressed, but also their minds are stressed. They've got this strange substance on them. They can't behave naturally. And now, this giant predator has gone and caught them. And so we really strive our best to be able to minimize those stressful effects. And so that stabilization site is something that we've shown to be extremely effective. And from there, those animals, they receive extra care before they're transported to where they're going to be receiving their long-term care. So I think that one of the major things we've learned as an organization is the value of that early intervention, that early stabilization, versus just capturing an animal, putting it in a car and transferring it to a facility that could be, 2 hours away, especially in LA where traffic can be very unpredictable. We're also involved in supporting research that is often conducted by various members of our various member organizations, that is aimed at our goal, which is achieving the best capture and care. So those studies that we fund go into the protocols that we spend months and months working on and developing. And one of the other things that I think is really important as an organization is after every spill, we sit down as a group and we discuss everything that both went well and things that we could improve upon. And I think that is extremely valuable because it gives us an idea of how we can continue to improve in the future. One of the other things that we've learned and incorporated is those numbers of member organizations have increased over the past 30 years. We incorporate member orgs that have knowledge and individuals, trained responders in various different areas. So there's people who are going to be more familiar with some of the seabirds that we work with. And then we have individuals who might be more familiar with amphibians or reptiles or mammals. And so being able to incorporate that is very helpful because, we're collaborative and we really try to work together to be learning from every incident and incorporating all of those changes so that for the next time we can do even better.
I think the research points that Jamie was making is absolutely critical to emphasize. The research is the reason why the OWCN came from the Department of Fish and Wildlife over to UC Davis. Research was so important to be able to learn from that is in 1996-97. That's why UC Davis was selected as the organization to lead the OWCN on behalf of the state. So since that time, we have funded over 300 studies and have allocated more than $4 million a year or $4 million total to be able to look at how to better respond and the effects of oil on wildlife. And we are the only organization in the world that funds that level of research specifically designated for oiled wildlife, understanding the effects of oil on wildlife.
I was going to ask, is this something, whether it's the research component or the rescue component or how you've brought them together, is it something that other places in the US or around the world can replicate?
Yes, it's not easy. The people of California had enough forethought to be able to establish this back in 1990 when the pictures of Exxon Valdez and oiled sea otters were on the nightly news every night. And at that time, it was a bit easier to get a per barrel fee put on oil coming into California, and the people of California were demanding it. There are other regions in the country that have attempted to replicate this. In fact, during the Deepwater Horizon spill in 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico, I was there for far too long, helping in that response. But we were contacted during and afterwards, where the local wildlife organizations were trying to use some of the funds that were available after that incident to develop a network like we have here. And it's a challenge, but people see the absolute value of organizations working together under a single umbrella, responding as one to be able to address these issues, because oil spills are amazingly complex when you start digging into how they're created. And so having a single body that can deal with this, the wildlife element has been a true success of ours.
Mm. We do have some video showing rescued wildlife being released back into the wild. What does it feel like to do that? I mean, I imagine it must be an amazing feeling after working so hard to get these animals, these birds, back to good health. I mean, what does it feel like for you guys?
Releases are wonderful, especially as somebody who saw them often on day one and ultimately was able to be involved with releasing them, and knowing that you made such a positive impact and allowing them to be able to enter the world. It's kind of funny because oftentimes, people expect this grand event, but for the most part, they want to get out of there. And so it is quick. It is a kind of, you got your one shot to get them getting away. And as much as we as humans would love for them to turn around and wave back at us, the real success is that they want to get away. And that's ultimately the goal. We want them to go out and be their natural selves, which is staying away from humans. So it is rewarding to be a part of that and really get to see it firsthand.
Yeah, it's like, thanks, but gotta go. Yeah. Mike?
No, it's absolutely. I mean, as a veterinarian, I mean, our oath is do no harm, right? And so seeing an animal that comes in that literally looks like a tarball coming into intake and having the ability to reverse that damage that was anthropogenic in nature, right? The oil spill was there because we caused the incident due to our need to use oil on a daily basis. So having the ability to reverse a human-induced disaster really effectively in returning a healthy and normal animal back into a clean environment, there truly is nothing better in my experience.
Before we wrap up, I was wondering if you could each talk a little bit about what drew you to this work. Jamie, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I can start with that. And I've had a kind of long relationship both with UC Davis as a very long-term student there for close to 10 years, as well as with one of our partners, which is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Honestly, the first thing that really drew me to working with wildlife in general was a study abroad program in South Africa, where I was able to interact both with veterinarians, with biologists, with some amazing species, and just to get to be involved in understanding how an environment works. From there, it just kind of seemed to be a natural progression to, working on a research degree as well as obtaining my veterinary degree. And I think one of the greatest things that just drew me to working with wildlife is there's so much that's unknown. And so as somebody who really enjoys conducting research, who enjoys working with collaborative partners and people all over, the country, the world within UC Davis, it really brings together such a great group of people with knowledge in so many different areas. And so I think being able to incorporate that into my everyday work to help species that are so valuable to our environment, as well as valuable is, we as humans inhabit this world, their presence is extremely unique.
Mike?
Yeah, I took a kind of circuitous route to my thing. I was not one who wanted to be a veterinarian since I could walk. I wanted to be a marine biologist since I was 4. And so Jacques Cousteau and the undersea world were the things that I wanted to do. And so I actually went to undergrad at UC Santa Barbara in marine biology. But I got involved with marine mammal rehabilitation and some of the science on that. And because of my interest in that, my mentors at the time said, why don't you look into veterinary school? Because it really seems to be a direction that could satisfy, your goals. And I thought they were crazy because I'd never thought I could get into vet school at that point, because I was aiming for a PhD at Scripps Institute of Oceanography in San Diego, but looked into it, and it absolutely was exactly what I wanted. The ability of veterinarians to be able to find a problem, diagnose it, implement change, and see that change really fit well with what I wanted to do as a career. So I came to Davis to get my veterinary degree, and was fortunate enough at that time. It was about the time where the Oil Wildlife Care Network was starting to establish itself here. So started responding to some spills as a contract veterinarian, and rolled into a PhD program looking at how oil affects wildlife, and have been fortunate enough to continue my career and my direction here within the OWCN. And looking back, I would do nothing different as far as that, because the ability as a veterinarian and somebody who is interested in wildlife health and conservation, the ability to lead and be part of a world leading organization that is directly involved with and implementing health to wildlife, it's exactly what I've always wanted to do.
Well, it's a wonderful example of bringing together research and practical care to make a difference, in the real world. This has really been great. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your really important work.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks so much.
Mike Ziccardi is director of the Oil Wildlife Care Network and executive director of the UC Davis One Health Institute. And Jamie Sherman is a veterinarian for the OWCN. On the next UC Davis Live, we'll be looking into the ongoing problems with supply chains causing shortages and price hikes on everything from groceries to appliances, and how they can be solved. Until next time, I'm Satirius Johnson, and this is UC Davis Live.